Good morning, everyone. It's Monday, June 29th. I'm Stephanie Haney. Welcome back to 3 News Now. Thank you for joining us here for your top headlines from WKYC.com and our WKYC app. There was a lot of big national news over the weekend, so we're going to start with some of those stories before we bring it back home here to Northeast Ohio and tell you about what's going on here in Northeast Ohio specifically. First, we'll start today with a Supreme Court ruling that has strucken down a Louisiana law regulating abortion clinics. SCOTUS today struck down a law requiring doctors who perform abortions to have admitting privileges at nearby hospitals in Louisiana. So the court ruled 5-4 that this violates the landmark Roe v. Wade decision back from 1973. It was Chief Justice John Roberts and 4 of his more liberal colleagues on the bench who voted together to strike down the law, which is interesting because in 2 previous abortion cases, Roberts had actually favored restrictions on abortions, but siding with the more liberal sect of the court to strike this law down. So the Louisiana law is virtually identical to one in Texas that the court struck down in 2016, and Roberts did mention that in the opinion that that previous decision controlled what was happening here. But in dissent, the people who voted against striking down the law, Justice Clarence Thomas wrote that a majority of the court is perpetuating, quote, ill-founded abortion jurisprudence by enjoining a perfectly legitimate state law and doing so without jurisdiction. Thomas was joined by President Donald Trump's 2 appointees, Justices Neil Gorsuch and Brett Kavanaugh, along with Justice Samuel Alito in the dissent that argued against striking down that law. Here's a little backstory of how it got to the Supreme Court. So a trial judge had said the law would not provide health benefits to women and would leave only one clinic that performed abortions open in Louisiana, and therefore would make it too difficult for women to get an abortion, which was a violation of the Constitution. An appeals court in New Orleans rejected that finding and upheld the law in 2018. And that court said that it doubted that any clinics would have to close and said that doctors had not tried hard enough to establish relationships with local hospitals. So when that happened, the clinics filed an emergency appeal with the Supreme Court asking that the law be blocked while the justices evaluated the case, decided whether to take on the case, and that was granted. So the law didn't take effect, and now it never will because that law has been stricken down in Louisiana. President Donald Trump was making headlines this weekend over a report that there were Russian bounties against U.S. troops in Afghanistan. U.S. intelligence officials say that Russia secretly offered bounties to Taliban-linked militants for killing American troops in Afghanistan, and President Donald Trump has denied being briefed on that. So the Trump administration was actually set to brief select members of Congress on this today. And this is said to have happened while Trump was pushing to withdraw the U.S. from Afghanistan, as the U.S. and the Taliban were holding talks to end the long-running war in Afghanistan. Now, there were conflicting reports about whether Trump was aware of these Russian actions. The intelligence officials told the Associated Press that the president was briefed on the matter earlier this year, but Trump has completely denied that. He tweeted on Sunday that neither he or Vice President Mike Pence had been briefed on this issue. He also tweeted that he was just told that intelligence officials didn't report the information to him because they didn't find it credible. However, officials who asked for anonymity so that they could discuss the issue with the Associated Press did say that Trump and Pence were briefed on the matter. Russia has called the report, quote, nonsense. Presumptive Democratic presidential nominee Joe Biden has spoken out about this. He said that if Trump was aware of the Russian bounties, that would be a truly shocking revelation about the commander-in-chief and his failure to protect U.S. troops in Afghanistan and stand up to Russia. Several members of Congress are now calling for an investigation to the matter on whether anyone was aware of this, who knew what and when, and what measures were taken to protect U.S. troops on the ground in Afghanistan. More international news related to the president. Iran has issued an arrest warrant for President Donald Trump over the killing of a top general. Iran has also asked Interpol, which is the international police and crime organization that facilitates international crime solving and bringing people to justice. So Iran has asked Interpol for help in detaining President Donald Trump and dozens of others that it believes carried out a U.S. drone strike that killed a top Iranian general in Baghdad. Trump does not face any danger of arrest, just to be clear at this time. But this is indicative of heightened tensions between Iran and the U.S. since Trump unilaterally withdrew from Tehran's nuclear deal with world powers. Tehran prosecutor Ali Al-Qassimir said Trump and more than 30 others are accused of being involved in a January 3rd strike. This was a strike that killed General Qassem Soleimani in Baghdad. And those people are now charged with murder and terrorism charges. This is according to the state-run IRNA news agency in Iran. So Al-Qassimir did not identify anyone else who is sought to be brought into custody other than Trump, but he did say that Iran would continue to pursue his prosecution even after his presidency ends, whether that be after this term or after a second term. Interpol, which is based in Lyon, France, did not immediately respond to a request for comment. Again, it is unlikely that Interpol would grant Iran's request, but it did, as its guidelines for notices forbid it from undertaking any intervention or activities of a political nature, and this is being seen as a political maneuver at this time. Lots of international news, like I told you, lots of national news. Now we're going to bring it back home here to Northeast Ohio. So here in Northeast Ohio, there's a new report that says our economic recovery could take years, according to this new report. So a group called Team NEO said that our region's economic recovery could take 5 years, and we could be behind the rest of the country in terms of our economic recovery related to COVID-19 here in Northeast Ohio. The Vice President of Strategy at Team NEO, Jacob Doritsky, said projecting out to 2025 shows a pretty slow slog back to gaining employment here in Ohio. The report said that our gross domestic product, which is the dollar amount of every single item made and every single service done here in Ohio, is projected to cover a little bit faster than employment numbers are projected to recover. Of course, we know several business areas are already in pretty bad shape. That includes the hospitality industry and also arts and culture, these industries that are sort of dependent on large group gatherings, on lots of people moving through confined spaces. Traditional manufacturing is also suffering more than some sectors here in Ohio. Even the medical industry is suffering, and that is one of our region's top economic producers. It is taking a hit, but this study does say that the medical industry is expected to recover sooner than other industries. Doritsky said that retraining people who are out of work might be the best way in order to bend that jobs curve and help people long term. But here is a big disclaimer about this study. The report didn't factor in a second wave of coronavirus, COVID-19, that could force more parts of the economy to shut down. And as we have heard from many medical professionals, those people say that a second wave of COVID-19 is all but certain. And they also say that we're still in the first wave of COVID-19. Speaking of COVID-19 and experts saying that we are still in the first wave, let's take a look at the numbers over the weekend. Cases were up again on Sunday. Now, deaths were still low, but do keep in mind this is a lagging indicator, as once new cases are reported, it does take time to see exactly how serious those cases will be and if they will result in eventual death. So here in Ohio, we have now reached over 50,000 reported COVID-19 cases. That's dating all the way back to March 9th when we first learned about it being here in the state of Ohio. On Sunday, we saw 854 new cases reported. That's up from what we saw on Saturday when there were 817 new cases reported. Now, Saturday was a slight dip from what we saw on Friday, when there was a huge spike, almost 1,000 new cases reported on Friday. There were 987 new cases of COVID-19 reported on Friday before we headed into the weekend. The total number of deaths here in Ohio has now reached 2,807. Yesterday, there were 3 new reported deaths as of 2 p.m. when those numbers came out from the Ohio Department of Health. Now, as I said just a moment ago, keep in mind the number of reported deaths is a lagging indicator, so we will need to see what happens with this surge of new cases and see how fatal these prove to be over the coming weeks. The total number of hospitalizations here in Ohio is now at 7,681, with 57 new hospitalizations reported yesterday, and the total number of ICU admissions is now very close to 2,000. It's at 1,946, with 30 new ICU admissions reported yesterday. Speaking of ICU admissions, this man is pretty lucky who was at the Cleveland Zoo, and he was seen climbing near a leopard habitat, climbing onto the leopard habitat. So pictures and videos shared by people showed this guy climbing up next to the habitat. He was touching and filming the leopard beside sort of a steel mesh kind of fence, clearly in an area that was off limits to the public. He had to climb up there in some way to get there. So Alexander Landry, who was a witness at the zoo, told 3 News that the leopard was pacing and it got its claw stuck at one point because it was clawing at the person who was up there filming, kind of right in this leopard's face at the Cleveland Zoo. A spokesperson for the Cleveland Zoo confirmed that this was in the Asian Highlands habitat. It was around 1:45 and no one was hurt. It was mentioned that the zoo had additional precautions in place because there was an incident back in 2015 when a person dangled their 2-year-old son over a railing in the cheetah exhibit, and that child fell 10 feet and hurt his leg. So additional precautions have been put in place near these habitats, which is potentially one reason, luckily, why this man was not able to gain even closer access to the leopard and was not hurt. The zoo does tell 3 News that at no point did the person physically enter the habitat, but definitely wasn't supposed to be that close, definitely in an area he wasn't supposed to be in. And that person has not been identified at this time. Now, if you are someone who is very interested in getting back to the amusement parks, you might be interested to know that Cedar Point reservations are now open. So we have a whole breakdown of how you can book your spot. Each season pass holder can reserve 1 visit at a time. So it's open right now for season pass holders. It will open up soon for resort guests starting July 11th. And then reservations for people with single day tickets will be able to make those reservations at a later date. So here's how the reservation process works. You're going to go to cedarpoint.com, and if you've already purchased a season pass, you need to have your season pass number ready. You can make reservations for up to 14 people. So if you've got people in your life with up to 14 season passes, you can make all of those reservations together. So then you'll put in the number of reservations that you're seeking to make. You'll go to the next screen. You'll select an available visit date and an available time for your group. You'll enter in the barcodes for all of those different season passes, and then you'll be able to schedule your reservations. Keep this in mind though. Reservations are not transferable. So let's say, for example, one parent makes a reservation to take 2 children to Cedar Point, but the other parent's not planning on going. Well, the other parent won't be able to go. Say that one parent can't make it, the other parent won't be able to swap in and go because that reservation is tied to the season pass holder of the person who specifically made the reservation. So keep that in mind. The reservations will be added to your ticket. You won't need to do anything other than scan your ticket once you're there for your arrival. So if you've got that season pass, you'll just scan it. They'll know that you're supposed to be there, and that is that. The park is opening for reduced hours from 11 a.m. to 8 p.m. each day throughout the season. That'll be Thursday, July 9th through Monday, September 7th right now. Of course, there are other changes you do need to be aware of. Remember, you do have to wear a mask if you're planning on going to Cedar Point. There's a smoking ban now, and they're not going to have any fast lane ticket sales, so those have been canceled. So keep that as mind as well. The website for reserving your tickets is cedarpoint.com/welcoming you back, but there are dashes between those words. So it's cedarpoint.com/welcoming-you-back. And of course, we have that linked on WKYC.com and our WKYC app, so you can check that out there. If you haven't done it already, make sure you download our WKYC app. You can download that from the Apple App Store if you have an iOS device, and also the Google Play Store if you have an Android device, for free. And when you download it, you'll get access, of course, to all of this information, everything we talked about here, new ways that you can send us photos and videos directly so that we can include them online, also on TV, and you'll be able to stream all of our TV shows for free, including What's New at 5 p.m., where I join you with the trending stories and entertainment news alongside the hosts Jay Crawford and Betsy Kling, and also What Matters Most at 6 p.m., Front Row at 7 p.m., and What's Next at 11 p.m., and any other time that we go live with many of the things that are happening around Northeast Ohio. You can get all of that in our WKYC app. I'll be back here at 2 p.m. as soon as we get those updated numbers from the Ohio Department of Health. Until then, have the great rest of your morning, and I'll see you back here in just a little bit. I'm Stephanie Haney.